Hey guys, welcome back to the Paladin's Alliance. It's the last video of 2021 and I wanted to keep it a little bit simple, nothing too complex here. I just wanted to do a power rankings before we get into the regular season heading into January. I think according to Bit, we might have a Blast Spring groups on our hands, so I wanted to get this out sooner rather than later. But without further ado, I'm just going to go from 10 to 1, just talk about each team for a couple of minutes and basically, like with the new roster moves included, where do these teams sit at? Because there's a lot of factors here, and I think that objectively, the teams that have been together for longer will perform better. And there's certain players where you can plug and play, and then there's certain situations where the plug and play can't really work because you're essentially restructuring the team. That you might have to rely a little bit more on individual form rather than an actual tactical playbook heading into what I'm assuming is the Blast groups, if not Katowice, right? So my number 10 team here is going to be Liquid, and they are obviously going through a restructuring. They've dropped Stewie, Grim, and Fallen, and they're adding in Shocks and OC, and if rumors are correct, which they probably are, especially with Nell's report, Nitro will be the 5th player on this team, and the reason why I'm putting them at 10th is a bit of a placeholder. Honestly, you could slot in a lot of tier 2 teams, brink of tier 1. You could add in like a CPH Flames, Furia, Fnatic. You could add in all of those really, but objectively, when we're going into Blast, the teams that are playing are the ones that are invited. Liquid is one of those, and I think that they'll obviously get their ranking points underway and whatnot. But the reason why I'm putting Liquid at number 10 is, look, Naf and Elige are a very safe pair of hands. They're consistently one of the best, or some of the best players North America has ever produced. And that firepower is largely why they had such a great honeymoon period towards the end of their tenure with the dead lineup, right? And obviously you had a lot of other factors going into it. You had Grim stepping up when going got tough. You had Fallen actually making an impact with the AWP and stuff like that. And so going into the first events of 2022, Naf and Elige will be a safe pair of hands there as well, I'm assuming, because they have been for quite a few years now, and you can rely on them to output that kind of firepower. And then we go into the new additions, right? OC objectively hasn't played very much at the tier 1 level, but when he has, he's kind of fallen short. But in recent, he's kind of stepped up. Obviously, at the EPL Season 16 conference, he did very well for himself, or sorry, Season 15 conference. He did very well for himself there, and basically single-handedly carried Extra Salt to that EPL Season 15 qualification spot, which is not an easy thing to do, especially with how good the Tier 2 European scene is, especially online. So I'd like to think OC has improved his game wildly through the last couple of years, and he's at that point in his career where he can compete with the big dogs of Tier 1 Counter-Strike, and we'll see that from him, I think, for sure. So that's why I like to think that their firepower has been elevated dramatically with the addition of OC, because now you have this core of Naf, Elige, and OC to really output some good fragging potential. And then Shocks is the good clutch factor to add into an organization like this. This is something that I think a team like Liquid desperately needs. And although Shocks' firepower might be under the heroics of Stewie 2K, I still think that objectively Shocks should put out a good amount of firepower with a decent amount of clutching. But the X factor remains Nitro. How is his playbook? How is his firepower switching over from Valorant? And does he remember the meta well enough to output a good style of game? And that's what we'll have to see, and that's why I put them so below at 10, and I could honestly drop them down a few pegs because we just don't know. Coming in at number 9, I have Big now slotting in Favin in the role of Gade. Gade is now on the bench, and objectively, I thought Big should not have replaced Zantares, but Zantares obviously wanted to do the Eternal Fire project, and it has its own results. They speak for themselves, but bringing in Favin is something that I've been asking for quite some time, just because of the fact that as far as his roles go, they slot into Big very well, and they provide that good amount of firepower to really bolster up this lineup. And something that I was talking about on a lot of different podcasts and such is that you don't really have a reliable core of fraggers on this team. You have Tapson, who's outputting great numbers consistently, but then when you go down the list, you have to look at Searson, who isn't necessarily the consistent force that we were seeing way back in 2020. And at that point, you had to look at that third player. Keto and Tizian weren't necessarily putting it up, so you had to look to that third player, and Gade couldn't produce that consistent firepower that Big needed. And although their tactics might be pretty sound at times, it just wasn't able to be executed because they couldn't just straight up win aim duels. And Favin will certainly elevate that team because of it. And so I definitely want to push up Big's ranking here to number 9 from 14 because of that. Now, going into things, people still say that Favin isn't enough for this team to be good because there still isn't any firepower from Keto and Tizian. But I have to say, if they get their map pool sorted out, which I think largely is predicated not necessarily on strategy, but more so firepower, this team can be very dangerous. And I think this plug and play is much more deceptively good than people make it out to be. So look out for Big, and they'll definitely be competitive going into these blast groups. Although being top 10 in the world is a great feat, I think that number 8 NIP shouldn't be this low on the list, frankly. They have one of the greatest players of all time. You have Device on your team. You have a world-renowned superstar that was supposed to come to fruition with Rez, and then you have a very good role player with Esatag. But for some reason, this team just isn't rising to the potential that I would really want them to be. They were supposed to be frontrunners going into the major at Stockholm, and then they kind of fizzled out. They were supposed to compete for top 5s pretty consistently, especially after you brought in a player like Device, and it just wasn't working out for this team. The reason why I have put them in the top 10 is because, frankly, they've had a lot of time to try to integrate Esatag into the system a lot more. And hopefully that time spent off the game, in the server, would actually help this team going into the start of 2022. But although Hampus is their best player, I still have some question marks regarding his calling style. A lot of it revolves around him, and so for that reason, his numbers also get inflated because of that. But I don't know if it's good enough for the team to actually perform, right? You're kind of leaving Plopsky as a sacrificial lamb. There's no real identity for him as a player. You have Esatag, who's kind of just cleaning up the bits and bobs that Hampus is just leaving behind him as he decides to go for these crazy lurk plays that, while can win rounds, can also backfire the team's chances of winning rounds consistently. And for that reason, that's why you have a very hit or miss T side that, I mean, you could see in the Inferno stats alone. I tweeted about this earlier on in the year, but they simply weren't able to get the ball rolling if they were starting on T side first. And that's predicated a lot on how risky Hampus's calling style is, and frankly, I don't think that risk is worth it when you have a safe pair of hands like Device, who is going to give you a steady output of frags as long as you're setting him up and giving him the proper utility to do so. So I am very negative here on NIP, and that's mostly because I believe that they could do a lot more if they changed up their tactical approach to the game and how they see the game, and maybe if there is a world where we can slot out Hampus and add in a different IGL, perhaps structure could make this team much better than it is. Or you'd have to look to the firepower upgrades again with moving out Plopsky and bringing in someone that can output a lot more frags in a quote-unquote star role that NIP touts or has touted him before. So this is probably the team that everybody's wondering about the most as to where I might put them in the rankings, and I'm going to put them at number 7. Objectively, the core of this team has a lot to offer. Apex's calling has been phenomenal throughout 2021. He's led a lineup that largely didn't want to succeed going into the end of 2021, at least as far as the organization is concerned. They didn't want to slot out Magisk and Dupree just yet, or slot out Kyojin and Shox and bring in Magisk and Dupree. And you have Zaiwu, who largely performed very well this year. 2021 was a great year for him. Not the nuclear form that he showed in 2020, but nevertheless, still a very good year from him. And Misuta's evolution, I have to say, I know a lot of people don't agree with me on this, but I think that he is evolved into a very consistent role player, and he'll be a very good piece going into 2022 because of that. Now, pulling apart Kyojin and Shox, I mean, I do see the Kyojin move like largely based off of how he isn't able to anchor any bomb sites, largely going 0 for 1, barely ever going 1 for 1. Essentially, when he dies on an anchor position, the round is essentially over because he's dead, and there's just no way to get back into the bomb site because of that. They gave him too much responsibility, and that's when you can look to a player like Magisk or Dupree. If they were ever given anchoring roles, they'd knock that out of the park, and that instantly elevates the gameplay of this team that I think could be that extra edge that they need to get over the line and try to compete against Na'Vi and try to maybe contend for the title, because they're so damn close throughout 2021 with the lineup that they had, that I think that if they have a stable two players in Magisk and Dupree who can output numbers if they so please, then who knows the level of this competition. But why am I putting them much lower than people might expect? Well, look, out the gates, they're probably not going to be as good as we might expect them to be, because we are now molding two completely different cores of Counter-Strike together. We are bringing in French Counter-Strike, which is largely a much more looser style of play, and you're bringing in Danish Counter-Strike, which is largely very, very structured. And how this is going to clash when we put these two together, we have absolutely no idea. We've never had this in Counter-Strike before, and for that reason, the risk is through the roof. You're bringing in Zonic, who's brought in one of the most tactical and structured lineups of all time, that are also the most successful lineup of all time, and that's something to really take into consideration when we're bringing in this kind of royalty into this team, right? And so perhaps if there is a meeting of the minds and it works out well, you have the perfect blend of structure and loose Counter-Strike, then this team could be a revolutionary roster at work here, and we could really we'd be talking about the first international roster to create a major winning lineup out of nothing. But with all that being said, Apex is a very fiery personality. Zonic has a lot of emotions going through him as well. Magisk as well. How are these personalities going to clash? We have no idea. These world cultures are very different from one another, and this could this roster could implode on itself very quickly, and we have no idea how that's going to play out. And for that reason, I'm putting them at number 7. But I'm very heavily anticipating a great individual form from all of these players, that they can make semi-deep runs, and I think they might qualify for whatever fall finals that are ahead of them in 2022. But beyond that, a first place finish in their groups, that's probably unlikely. But keep an eye on Vitality. I'm sure all of you guys will be doing the same. This is the lineup that frankly disappointed in 2021. And we had so much opportunity for this team to rise to the ranks. They even showed that perhaps LAN Counter-Strike is where they belong, with a deep run at Cologne, pushing into the semifinals, I believe. But then the team kind of fizzled out, and there wasn't necessarily much to offer, especially with how underperforming Olofmeister and Rain were putting out throughout the year. And for that reason, we have to reconsider where we put FaZe in the world rankings. And we put them at number 9 because they qualified for a lot of big events, and just being at those events is important enough. But now the move that we've all been waiting for is finally coming to fruition. Olofmeister is packing his bags, and we're bringing in Rops, the Estonian love of the world, and I'm just so excited to see how this move works out, because Kerrigan has played with Rops for a large part of his career. He's brought him trophies. He's made him the player that he has, and we've seen so many different articles, one from HLTV and a lot of actually just HLTV, frankly, but they're talking about how he is the end game for Kerrigan, because objectively, I think he's talked about in interviews as well that he believes he's his best teammate, and it's going to be great to see how Kerrigan decides to play Rops. Is he going to play him in a very lurky style position yet again, and move around the roles a little bit on this team, and shift Rain to a more supportive role that Olofmeister had? That is yet to be seen, and perhaps that might work out better for FaZe in the long run. Or we shift Rain into Olofmeister's we keep Rain in his own position, and we create Rops as just a stoic anchor on bomb sites, and a much more a much more default style player And we don't know how he's going to be played, but the fact is the raw aim and skill of Rops is largely better than Olafmeister, and that can bail FaZe out of those situations where you had Olafmeister going 0 for 1, 1 for 1 and bomb sites. Largely, when I think of the Olafmeister atrocities, I'd say, is when on the B bomb side of Ancient, where he isn't able to provide any firepower behind back temple, and for that reason they just get a bomb plant for free. And Brokey, although he has some heroics, or Twist has some heroics, or Kerrigan has a crazy CT flank, they aren't able to get back into the round because, frankly, that 1 for 1 wasn't brought to the table. And for that reason, Rops could really elevate the team just from that alone. Now, playbook-wise, entry-wise, we still need to see more from Kerrigan, and we need to see more from Rain. And if that can happen, this team can be absolutely elite. That's why I'm thinking number 6 is a great spot for them, because you now have one of the best cores of Counter-Strike that you can ask for internationally. You have Twists, the Magician, putting great numbers in 2021 and has really had a resurgence in form. You have Brokey, who is slowly starting to get to that point where he can be considered a world-class opper. And then you have now Rops, a top 20 player in the world on a dying mouse sports, now being brought in to play under the IGL that he's looked the best under of Kerrigan. So you have everything to ask for. There are now no excuses for FaZe to perform. If they don't perform, that's when you have to look to somebody like Kerrigan and really question their IGL capabilities at this level of the game. And who knows what the issues really are for FaZe if they can't start to bring in titles, because right now you have an outstanding core and you should be getting results behind it. There's really no excuses now. So in the big leagues now, number 5 on our list is probably going to be Virtus Pro here. And although they had a pretty decent 2021 at all the LAN events that they had, they performed pretty well. But the reason why I'm not putting them much higher on this list is just the lack of actual competitiveness when we get deeper into the playoffs. Largely, they're a very consistent team at performing well in the group stage or scraping by to get to the quarterfinals or semifinals. But there still seems to be a little bit more gelling that needs to be done on this team before I can truly say that they're contending for titles, right? And the reason why I'm putting them at number 5 is, one, they have the chemistry. Their core is undeniably good. They've had Buster Kicker, Yekindar, and Jame have been together for so long now that you can plug and play basically anybody you want. But with the player like Flit that you're bringing in for Sanji, you kind of have to change your gameplay a little bit, in the sense that Flit is a much better fragger than Sanji, and that's kind of no denying that, right? Although Sanji was a very supportive player and helped facilitate a lot of these fraggers from getting better numbers, Flit is objectively a better player, so for that reason you have to change up the style that you're playing a little bit more. And they've done that pretty well here, but I still need to see whether or not the map pool reflects that. And they've fallen through with a lot of maps. Mirage has dropped down to 37.5% in the last 3 months. Ancient 42.9, which is a little bit deceptive in my thinking, but they decided to pull it out towards the major, and they got a couple key wins against FaZe that I didn't think that was possible. They had like a 0% win rate at one point on this map, so that's a little bit of a question mark. Overpass and Inferno are good maps for them. Dust 2 as well. They don't play that very often, but they have good maps. But I want, once that the integration of Flit comes through and they get a little bit more tactics to the table and a little bit better CT setups, we could be getting a much better Virtus Pro. And if Yekindar can get a more consistent impact in the game, there's no stopping Virtus Pro, in my opinion, especially when Yekindar is on form. Jame, I'd like to get him more aggressive on the AWP. I'd like to have him take more risky clutches, but you know, it is Jame. He's been at this type of gameplay for quite a while now, but hopefully he realizes in this offseason that he has a lot of the chops to put up good clutches, and the sky's the limit if he can play a little bit more aggressive on the AWP. So number 5, very competitive for Virtus Pro, but I want to see them contend for more titles heading into 2022. This is going to be a little bit of a shock, but I'm putting G2 at number 4, and it seems as though that might not be the best move on paper as far as my rankings are concerned, but m0NESY is not expected to be a superstar. There is no reason for him to be a superstar and this team to still be competitive, right? Amanek wasn't a very good AWP player, frankly, and he was forced onto a role that he didn't necessarily need, but still made it look like he was capable of wielding it. Now, bringing in Monesi, he's very, very formidable on the AWP. His skill level, his eye test is definitely passed. We've seen that time and time again at the We Play Academy League, and for that reason, he's going to slot in very well into this team from that alone. If we can get a little bit more aggressive natures out of him, again, very similar to Jame in that regard, if he comes out of the gates swinging and relying on his aim to carry him through certain scenarios, then this team now has a very, very, very good lineup on paper. You have Nico and Hunter, a very good duo. You have Jax putting in those entries on the table, and then you have Nexa being a stable, sometimes less so, but sometimes stable fragging power that this team does belong. I still at number 4, and then once Monesi feels a little bit more comfortable, that's when we can start bumping them up a little bit on the rankings and see them contending for titles, because that's what this move is all about. It's for them to slay Na'Vi and become the number 1 team that they want to be for so long. They've had so many titles evade them in the last year that Monesi just has to be an average opper. And once he actually gets integrated into the lineup and becomes a world-class opper, if that is to be, then that's when G2 can be considered a number 1 team, especially with the firepower that they have on the table. Nico had an absolutely incredible, insane 2021 when all the lands came back. Hunter decided to actually start showing up that he wasn't showing in the online section of 2021, that he was showing in the tail end of 2021, that I think that you now have no excuses again for G2 to perform. If Xtaz can integrate Monesi, which he has done with other French lineups before, where he's able to integrate younger players, then sky's the limit for G2, and that's why I'm putting them at number 4, and why I think that they have the most potential to try to slay Na'Vi just through firepower alone, because the map pool wise, it matches pretty well against Na'Vi, I'd say. Top 3 now. Top 3 and number 3, Heroic is going to be my pick here, and although their potential has been falling flat in the very tail end of 2021, I'm going to chalk it up to the internal issues that they were having with Staven having his family issues, and I feel bad for him, and I feel bad for their organization as well, that it had to come at a time like this when they were starting to peak as a roster. But going into 2022, they still have just an incredible base of skill on this team. There's no real weak link on this team. I was talking about this with my pals earlier, but Shush is an outstanding anchor in Danish Counter-Strike, and he should not be removed from this lineup if any situation arose, right? You have Refresh, a very clutch player, a player that is able to still output a great amount of frags. And you have Tesses, who's also outputting a great amount of kills, communicating very well on the team, being a good glue player for Cadian and Staven. Staven has been a revelation in Danish Counter-Strike. Him playing along in Fragsters, he just completely evolved his gameplay, and he's just been such a consistent force on this team that I'm just marveling at how good this player is and how many complexions and facets that this player has. And then Cadian has IGL'd very, very well. Prior to this, I haven't been very high on his calling. I thought it was very average. But I guess just with the coaching staff that are around him, the motivation and passion that he's always had behind his gameplay, he's risen up to the task, and he's had a very structured T side, but there's still some loose elements with the firepower of the squad that they can mid-round very well too, and with how good their late game riflers are with Refresh, the sky's the limit for this team again. I keep repeating that phrase, but frankly, this top 5 is very dangerous for that reason. The potential is there, but we just want to see whether or not it'll be realized, and that's why this top 5, this top 10 can shift very dramatically after just the Blast Fall groups alone, right? Or Blast Spring groups. I don't know why I said fall. I've been mentioning fall this entire time, but it's spring. But with that out of the way, the only caveats that I'm putting for this team is Cadian isn't a world-class opper as of late. Thorin had a video with it where he talked about the map pool and the recent results of this team. But Cadian, when it gets to late rounds and late parts of the map, he isn't able to provide the fragging that you might need in certain situations. A large part of it has to come off of the emotions that he wears on his sleeve, right? He's a very emotional player, but at the same time, that can also backfire when things aren't going your way and when you're in those 13-13 situations where you need just a couple frags to just get the motivation up for your players. And if you miss, that's when it can be a very self-damaging to the team and to the player. And for that reason, I don't know what the stability is going to be like for this team. They're still a very young team, and perhaps he'll be able to harden himself on the big stage and fight through that, because they fought through at the fall finals last year, and well, with the crowd that was disgusting in that regard and wasn't able to support him and the championship nature of Heroic. But I think in 2022 there's a lot of potential for Heroic to do well, but there are a little bit of setbacks with how Cadian likes to play the game, and whether or not the mentality of this team can become a championship level team, and whether they can slay teams like Na'Vi, teams like Gambit going into 2022. Okay, so Gambit is going to be my number 2 team, and although it may seem that I've been a little up and down on this team, and I feel like it's pretty warranted, right? Hobbit is a great revelation on this team. I've made a video on him. You can check that out in the description. I'll probably link it as cards. And also, Inters is a very good supportive player. I did Unsung Heroes. That's how I started this channel. So Inters is a very good player as well. But the players that I want to look at that are kind of holding Gambit back and why I am so hard on this team is Axile and Shiro. Nafid is able to call very well, but Axile and Shiro aren't able to get those superstar levels of performances that is the reason why they were such a force to be reckoned with in 2020. Their map pool was rock solid because you could have such a reliable 1-2 punch of Hobbit and Axile going into bomb sites and getting entries, that maps like Mirage and maps like Inferno and Dust 2, those 3 maps were so killer for them in the online era, but they've fallen off dramatically because on land they just haven't found that level of form that we wanted them to have. And you've seen Gambit as a whole struggling to close out games against teams like Enterprise and Isuba at V4. And although they won the event, they had a very poor start, and that's something that I'm worried about. And that's why I didn't put them at number 1. And obviously we have Na'Vi on the horizon. You know that it's going to be Na'Vi. We're not going to kid ourselves here, but that's the reason why they're not able to beat them when they get to the finals. That's why the series where they're trying to compete against Na'Vi are falling incredibly flat, although that they have a psychological advantage on the online side of things. They aren't able to translate that in series wins against Na'Vi on LAN. And for that reason, I think that the experience that they've gained this year to the tail end is all just a setup. It's all set up for the 2022 to come in swinging, because they're going to have so much time to prepare. And that's one of the key things that was the reason why they were so competitive in the online era, because they had so much time to prepare. And now that they have this playbook, we can start to see them compete going into the Blast events. And I think they'll start to hit their stride again at Katowice, and perhaps they'll be able to try to defend that title better than most people might expect. So look out for Gambit. I think they have a lot of potential still yet to be shown, and they'll definitely give Na'Vi for a run for their money going into 2022. All these points that I'm making all apply to the best team in the world right now, and will be the best team in the world when they go into 2022, and that is Natus Vincere, undeniably the best team. The time that they have to actually prepare is going to help them dramatically, because a lot of teams are going to be reading into Na'Vi now. They have a target on their back, and for that reason, you can build in more depth into their map pool as well. You can even try to have a 7-map pool, fight for a comfortable Vertigo. Who even knows what Na'Vi's playbook can look like going into 2022? Katowice is going to be insane because of that. And let's say they even don't try to build up their playbook, right? Let's just say they go in with the same style of game going into 2022. Well, you still have objectively the highest amount of firepower on a team right now. You have Simple, the greatest player of all time, just on this team, and you can always bail them out no matter the situation, no matter the game state, no matter the score. He's always there to bail them out. You have Electronic, who's finally hit his stride yet again now that Land is back, right? He's just been such a force to be reckoned with, a great duo partner for Simple. But we've always known that, right? But beyond that, Now players like Boomich, who largely were the sacrificial lamb for the team, is now fragging and then also getting that information for players like Simple and Electronic. He's being such a key proponent for this team to elevate them into like god tier levels of success. You have Perfecto, who is just so knowledgeable at his role and is just such a great role player for the team. Understands his levels of survivability and understands whether or not he should be taking fights here and whether or not he should be just playing support for players like Simple and Electronic. And he's such a great clutch player that Perfecto is such an integral part of this team as well. And then lastly, the key X factor of this squad, the rookie of Bit, just being an absolute monster in 2021, just undefeated on LAN, right? We've had that stat going through. He's just undefeated on LAN, and even if he's had one bad LAN so far, he's just been such a revelation in how he's been playing. He's just such a has such strong firepower underneath him that he doesn't even need to be the most brainy of players. He could just be a very key firepower piece on this team, and for that reason, Navi is just the most complete squad in World Counter-Strike right now. There's no denying that, and for that reason, 2022 is going to be the year of Navi, unless these teams that are on the horizon are going to make it competitive for them, because they surely are, I'd like to think. So that's all from me in 2021. I've had an absolute blast creating this YouTube channel, trying to build it up, going on all these shows with people like Thorin, and doing live desks, having my first event with DreamHack. I just want 2022 to be more of this, right? More videos, more events to be on, more podcasts to be on. I'm just so thrilled for 2022, and it's been such a blessing for you guys to grace my channel like this and give me the kind of platform to exist in the CS space. And I hope you continue on this journey with me, subscribe, all that jazz, and we hit 1K eventually. We hit that monetization. So I have a lot of announcements coming on the horizons. I want you to stick around, and hopefully in the new year you'll be able to support me just as well, or if not better. So thank you for everything, and I will see you in the new year. So thank you again. I cannot thank you enough. Peace.